Story 1, The Ride on the Empty Road. Jake always loved the open road. It was his escape, his sanctuary from the chaos of life. He was the kind of person who sought solace in solitude, far away from the bustling crowds and the noise of everyday life. He didn't mind being alone, in fact, he preferred it. The endless stretches of highway, the hum of the engine, and the wind that ruffled his hair, it was all part of the therapy he sought during his long drives. On this particular day, Jake had decided to take a detour through an unfamiliar part of the country. He had been traveling through Wisconsin, heading westward, when he saw a sign for an old route that stretched through the heart of Montana. The sign was faded, but something about it intrigued him. It promised scenic views and quiet roads, away from the beaten path. Without a second thought, Jake turned off the main highway and onto the narrow, winding road. It didn't take long for the scenery to change. The lush green fields and sprawling forests gave way to an eerie landscape. The further he drove, the emptier the road seemed. The clouds overhead grew thicker, casting a heavy shadow on the land below. The air grew cold, and the familiar hum of his engine seemed to fade as the silence enveloped him. There were no other cars, no signs of life, just the road stretching endlessly before him. Jake didn't mind the quiet, but something felt off. The wind had picked up, rustling through the trees in a strange, almost unnatural way. He checked his rearview mirror, but there was no sign of any cars behind him. It felt like he was the only person left on Earth. After a few hours of driving, Jake began to feel the weariness of the road. His eyes were heavy, and his mind started to wander. The thought of stopping for a break crossed his mind, but there was no town in sight. Just as he was about to give up and keep driving, he saw a small gas station in the distance, barely visible through the fog that had begun to roll in. The gas station looked old, really old. The paint was peeling, and the lights flickered dimly. There was no one else in sight, but the pumps were still functional. He pulled in and stepped out of the car, stretching his legs as he filled up the tank. It was then that he noticed the man standing near the corner of the station, leaning against the wall. He was tall and thin, with a long, weathered coat that seemed too big for him. His face was obscured by the hood of his coat, but Jake could make out the hollow eyes that stared at him with an unsettling intensity. The man didn't say anything at first, but his gaze never wavered. Jake, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease, decided to approach him. "Hey there," Jake said, attempting to break the silence. "You live around here?" The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply pointed toward the road. "You shouldn't be on this road," the man said, his voice low and rasping. "This place is cursed. No one who drives down this way ever leaves." Jake laughed nervously, thinking the man was just another oddball living in the middle of nowhere. But the man's expression remained serious, his eyes never leaving Jake's. "You're not the first," the man continued. "Others have come this way too, only to disappear, lost forever in the fog." Jake chuckled again, but this time there was something about the man's demeanor that made him uneasy. He quickly finished pumping the gas and got into his car. The last thing he heard before starting the engine was the man's voice, repeating the same warning, "Turn back. The fog will take you." Jake shook off the encounter, convinced that the man was just a local eccentric. He wasn't going to let some crazy warning ruin his trip. But as he drove further down the road, the fog grew thicker, and the air became colder. The feeling of isolation intensified. It was as if the world was closing in around him. He glanced in his rearview mirror and saw that the road behind him was empty, just the endless stretch of asphalt disappearing into the mist. But as he drove on, a strange sensation settled over him. He wasn't alone. The feeling of being watched crept up his spine, and he began to glance nervously over his shoulder, convinced that someone was following him. At first, he thought it was just his imagination. But then, through the thick fog, he saw the headlights of a car in the distance. The car was far behind him, but it was approaching quickly, steadily gaining on him. Jake pressed his foot down on the accelerator, but no matter how fast he drove, the car behind him remained at a constant distance. It was as if the car was toying with him, matching his speed exactly. The road stretched on, endlessly, and the fog continued to thicken, swallowing up the world around him. Jake's heart began to race. The car behind him was no longer just a set of headlights, it was something more. The more Jake tried to outrun it, the closer it seemed to get. It was as if the car was somehow attached to him, bound to his every move. And then, just as he was about to pull over in a panic, the car vanished. Jake's breath caught in his throat as the fog parted momentarily, revealing an empty stretch of road behind him. No car. No headlights. Just the endless void of the fog. He looked ahead, but the road ahead of him seemed to stretch into nothingness. He tried to calm himself, telling himself that it was just a trick of the fog, that his mind was playing tricks on him. But as he drove on, things began to get worse. The fog seemed to grow thicker with each passing minute, and the world around him felt distorted, unreal. The road itself began to change, twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. The GPS on his phone was glitching, showing him the same stretch of road over and over again. Jake tried to turn around, but no matter which way he went, the road looped back to the same spot. The landmarks that had once seemed familiar now appeared distorted, as though they were part of a dream. It was then that he realized something horrifying: he wasn't on a normal road. This place was cursed. He was stuck, trapped in the fog, with no way out. Panic set in as the fog grew denser, and the shadows around him seemed to move with a life of their own. He could hear strange whispers in the air, faint and unintelligible, like a distant chant. He wasn't alone anymore. Something was out there, watching him, waiting. Suddenly, the shadow of a figure appeared in the mist, a tall, gaunt figure, with glowing eyes that pierced through the fog. It was the man from the gas station. But now, he was no longer a simple traveler. He was something far darker. "You should have listened," the man said, his voice echoing around Jake. "This road is not just a road. It's a place where the lost souls are bound. And now, you're one of them." Jake realized the truth too late. The fog, the endless road, the eerie figures, it was all part of a curse, a trap set for those who wandered too far from the beaten path. The road didn't lead anywhere. It led to nowhere. The figure stepped closer, and Jake tried to run, but his legs felt heavy, as though the fog itself was pulling him down. He turned to look behind him, but there was only the darkness of the mist, swallowing him whole. And then, in the silence, he understood. He wasn't going to escape. No one ever did. He was trapped, just like the others. Forever lost in the fog, where time didn't exist and the road stretched on for eternity. Story 2, The Woman in the Mirror. Sarah had always been fascinated by antiques. She loved the idea that every old object had a story, a past that was hidden beneath its surface, waiting to be uncovered. She spent hours browsing through second-hand stores, searching for rare pieces that spoke to her. But she never expected to find something like this. It was an antique mirror, framed in dark wood with intricate carvings of flowers and vines. It was massive, larger than any mirror Sarah had ever seen before. As soon as she laid eyes on it, she knew she had to have it. She bought it without hesitation, feeling an eerie connection to the reflection it promised to show her. Sarah's apartment was small, and there wasn't much space to hang the mirror, but she made room for it in the living room. The moment she placed it on the wall, the atmosphere in the room changed. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the mirror was somehow sucking the life out of the room. She shook off the feeling, convinced it was just her imagination. For the first few days, Sarah admired the mirror, appreciating its beauty and the way it seemed to reflect light in a way no other mirror could. But soon, she began to notice strange things. At night, she would wake up and see a faint figure in the reflection, standing behind her. The figure was always blurry, its features impossible to make out. At first, she thought it was just the way the moonlight hit the mirror, playing tricks on her eyes. But as the nights wore on, the figure became clearer. It was a woman, a pale, thin woman with long, dark hair. Her face was hauntingly beautiful, yet there was something terrifying about her expression. Sarah tried to ignore the unsettling feeling the mirror gave her, but it became harder to do so. Every time she looked into it, the reflection seemed to change. The woman would be standing closer to her, watching her with a cold, unblinking stare. Sometimes, the woman would be smiling, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Other times, she would look sad, her face filled with sorrow. The more Sarah looked into the mirror, the more she felt drawn to it, compelled to study the woman's face, to understand what she wanted. One night, as Sarah stood before the mirror, brushing her hair, she heard a voice, soft, almost a whisper. It came from the reflection, not from behind her. The voice was sweet, yet it carried an undertone of something sinister. "Help me," the voice whispered. Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned around, but there was no one there. She looked back at the mirror, but the woman's reflection remained unchanged, her cold eyes staring back at her. For the next few nights, Sarah heard the voice again. It was always the same, "Help me." But this time, she couldn't ignore it. She had to know who the woman was, and why she was calling out to her. One evening, Sarah decided to investigate the mirror's origins. She searched the antique store where she had bought it, asking the owner about its history. The old man who ran the shop was hesitant at first, but eventually, he told her the story. "The mirror," he explained, had once belonged to a woman named Eliza Hawthorne. Eliza was a beautiful young woman, full of life, until she married a man named Charles Hawthorne, a wealthy, cruel man. The couple moved into an old mansion on the outskirts of town, but soon, Eliza began to change. Her once bright spirit seemed to dim, and she became obsessed with the mirror, spending hours staring into it. Some say it was the mirror's power that drove her mad, others believed it was Charles's cruelty, but no one knew for sure. Eliza was found dead one night, her body lying in front of the mirror, her face twisted in a horrified expression. The mirror, the man said, had been passed down through the generations, each owner succumbing to the same madness that Eliza had experienced. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the woman in the mirror was trying to communicate with her. The whispers grew louder, more persistent. "Help me," it said again, but this time, there was a hint of desperation in the voice. One night, Sarah stayed up late, staring into the mirror, trying to make sense of what was happening. As she gazed at the woman's reflection, something changed. The woman's face twisted into a grimace of pain, her eyes wide with terror. Sarah reached out to touch the glass, and the moment her fingers made contact, she felt a jolt of cold electricity run through her body. The woman in the mirror smiled a twisted, cruel smile that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She reached out to Sarah, her fingers pressing against the glass from the other side. Sarah tried to pull away, but her hand wouldn't move. It was as if something was holding her in place. "Help me," the voice whispered one last time. But this time, it wasn't from the reflection, it was in her mind. Suddenly, the reflection shifted, and Sarah found herself face to face with the woman. Her mouth opened wide, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. She lunged at Sarah, her cold hands reaching through the glass, grabbing hold of Sarah's wrist. Sarah screamed and tried to break free, but the woman's grip was too strong. She could feel her body being pulled into the mirror, the cold, dark world on the other side threatening to consume her. In a moment of pure panic, Sarah used all her strength to break free from the mirror's hold. She stumbled backward, falling to the floor, gasping for breath. The woman's laughter echoed in her ears, but Sarah could no longer hear the whispers. The reflection was gone. The mirror, once a portal to the other side, was now just an ordinary piece of glass. But Sarah wasn't sure if she had truly escaped. The whispers still lingered in her mind, and every time she passed the mirror, she felt its cold presence watching her. She didn't know if Eliza's curse had truly been broken or if she had simply become the latest victim to be claimed by the mirror. Sarah decided to leave the apartment, to get rid of the mirror once and for all. But when she went to the antique store to sell it, the owner refused to take it back. He told her that once someone had been marked by the mirror, they could never be freed. Sarah left, unsure of where to go next. But as she walked down the street, she couldn't shake the feeling that the woman in the mirror was still watching her. And no matter where she went, the curse would follow. Story 3, The Whispering Shadows. Ryan and his friends had always been drawn to the eerie, abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. It had been vacant for years, its windows dark and lifeless, the once grand facade now weathered and decaying. No one in town knew much about its past, except that it was rumored to be haunted. But for Ryan and his friends, that only made it more intriguing. They decided to spend the night inside, determined to uncover the mysteries that lay within. The mansion loomed over them as they approached, its towering spires and broken windows giving it an ominous appearance. The front door creaked open as Ryan pushed it, revealing a dark, musty hallway inside. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards groaned underfoot. But there was something else, a feeling of unease that seemed to hang in the air, as though the house itself was alive, watching them. As they explored the mansion, strange things began to happen. The air grew colder, and shadows seemed to shift and move in the corners of their eyes. Ryan and his friends laughed nervously, dismissing it as their imaginations running wild. But when they reached the second floor, the atmosphere took a darker turn. In one of the rooms, they found an old, dusty portrait hanging on the wall. It was a painting of a woman, her face pale and sorrowful. Her eyes seemed to follow them as they moved around the room. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine as he stared at the painting, his heart racing. It was then that they heard the whispering. At first, it was faint, like the wind brushing through the cracks in the walls. But then it grew louder, clearer, as if someone was speaking directly into their ears. The whispers were unintelligible, but they carried an unmistakable sense of dread. Ryan and his friends decided to leave, but as they turned to exit, the door slammed shut on its own. The whispering grew louder, now accompanied by the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and heavy. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow, stretching toward them like long, bony fingers. They backed away, terrified, but it was too late. The shadows moved faster now, engulfing the room. One by one, the group was pulled into the darkness, their screams muffled by the sinister whispers that filled the air. Ryan tried to fight back, but the shadows were too strong, too powerful. They whispered his name, promising him eternal darkness. As Ryan was pulled deeper into the shadows, he saw the face of the woman from the painting. She was no longer just a portrait, she was real, her eyes hollow and lifeless, her mouth twisted into a twisted grin. The last thing Ryan saw before the shadows consumed him was the woman's face, whispering the final words that would seal his fate, "You will never leave." Ryan's body ached, his mind clouded by fear, as he stumbled through the darkness. The shadows that had once been mere flickers now coiled around him, squeezing the air from his lungs. His friends were gone, sucked into the abyss of blackness that filled the room with an all-encompassing chill. Only Ryan remained, disoriented, and barely able to move, his legs heavy as though weighed down by an invisible force. He tried to scream, but the only sound that came out was a hollow, breathless wheeze. The whispering around him was deafening now, louder and more insistent, as if the very walls of the mansion were alive, trying to suffocate him with their unearthly cries. They weren't just voices, they were voices of the past, voices that had lived and died in this very house, trapped by something more sinister than Ryan could comprehend. In his panic, Ryan's hand brushed against a cold, rough surface. His eyes shot open, he hadn't even realized he had moved closer to the wall. But this was no ordinary wall. A faint outline of a door appeared before him, almost as if it had materialized from thin air. The door was old, rusted, and covered in a thick layer of dust, but the handle was unmistakable, a tarnished brass knob that seemed to beckon him. Instinctively, Ryan reached out and twisted the knob. It was stubborn, as though resisting him, but he persisted. With a low creak, the door swung open, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward into an abyss of blackness that seemed to swallow the very light in the room. Without thinking, driven by fear and desperation, Ryan stepped into the stairwell. The air was thick and damp, and the shadows on the wall seemed to follow him, reaching toward him like the hands of unseen figures. He stumbled down the steps, his heart pounding so hard in his chest that it threatened to break free. The staircase spiraled down for what felt like an eternity before it finally opened into a vast underground chamber. The air was heavy with the smell of mildew and decay. The only light came from the flickering flame of an old, rusted lantern hanging from the ceiling. It swayed gently, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. Ryan's eyes scanned the space, taking in the cold stone walls and the strange symbols etched into them. Some symbols were familiar runes he had seen in books about ancient rituals, but others were completely alien, twisted forms that seemed to change when he looked away. They seemed to pulse, as though alive, feeding on the fear that radiated from him. The room was vast, but it was filled with a sense of suffocating confinement. A large altar sat in the center of the room, its surface cracked and covered in dust. Around the altar were dozens of small, weathered statues, each depicting the same figure, a woman with hollow eyes, twisted features, and a grotesque smile. Ryan's stomach churned as he recognized the figure. It was the woman from the portrait. But these statues were different. They were not just representations, they were life-sized, their eyes glowing faintly with a strange, otherworldly light. Something in the room was stirring, and Ryan could feel it, a presence that seemed to loom over him, watching him, waiting. His pulse quickened as he slowly approached the altar, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. As Ryan reached the altar, the whispering began again, this time more urgent, more frantic. The voices were growing louder, filling his ears with an unholy cacophony. The words were no longer unintelligible, they were clear now, though still impossible to fully understand. They spoke of a curse, a ritual that had been performed in this very chamber centuries ago, and the woman who had sacrificed her soul to it. The woman, he realized, was the key. She had been part of the ritual, and her soul had been bound to the house, trapped within its walls for eternity. Her suffering had fueled the shadows that haunted the mansion, and now, it was Ryan's turn to become part of that endless torment. A voice, clear and cold, suddenly broke through the din of whispers. "You shouldn't have come." Ryan spun around, heart leaping in his chest. In the shadows, he saw her standing there, in the center of the room. The woman. She was no longer just a shadow in the corner of his vision. She was real, tangible, her features now fully visible under the dim light of the lantern. Her face was pale and gaunt, her hair long and tangled, hanging in wet strands over her face. Her eyes, those hollow, lifeless eyes, locked onto his with an intense, suffocating gaze. A chill ran down Ryan's spine as her lips curled into a slow, agonizing smile. "You're too late," she whispered, her voice like the scrape of nails on a chalkboard. "The ritual is already in motion." Before Ryan could react, the room seemed to shift. The walls seemed to pulse with an energy that made his skin crawl. The ground beneath his feet began to tremble, and the statues surrounding the altar began to move, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The woman's form flickered in and out of existence, as though she was caught between this world and another. Ryan turned to run, but the shadows that had once been silent now surged forward, rushing toward him like a flood. The air became thick with an unnatural force, as though the house itself was alive and hungry. Ryan stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet as the darkness enveloped him, swallowing him whole. Ryan could feel his body being dragged into the darkness, his limbs heavy, his mind spinning. He screamed, but no sound came out. The shadows were everywhere now, crawling beneath his skin, whispering in his ear, calling to him, urging him to join them. Through the darkness, he glimpsed his friends Ethan, Sarah, and Claire. They were standing in the center of the room, their faces twisted in terror. But they weren't moving, their eyes wide open, as though they were trapped in some kind of trance. It was then that Ryan understood. They weren't dead. Not yet. But they were close. The ritual had claimed them, and they were now part of the Shadow's lost souls, bound to the mansion forever. The woman stepped forward, her form becoming more solid with each passing second. Her eyes locked onto Ryan once more. You should never have entered this house. Now, you belong to us. Ryan tried to break free, but the shadows held him tight, suffocating him. As the woman's cold fingers reached out to touch him, he felt a jolt of energy surge through him, a wave of dark power that ripped through his body like electricity. The room exploded in a flash of blinding light. When the light faded, Ryan found himself standing alone in the center of the room. The shadows were gone, and the air had returned to its still, oppressive silence. His friends were gone, vanished, as if they had never been there. But the woman remained. She was standing in front of him, her eyes fixed on him with a chilling intensity. You can still escape, she whispered, her voice softer now. But you must make a choice. Ryan felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a profound silence. What choice? He asked, his voice hoarse from fear. The woman's smile faded, replaced by a look of sorrow. You can leave. But to do so, you must take someone else's place. You must bring someone else into this house, someone who will take your place in the shadows. Ryan's heart stopped. His mind raced as he realized what she meant. To escape, he would have to condemn someone else to the same fate, trap them in this house for eternity, feeding the darkness that had claimed so many souls before him. Tears filled his eyes as he looked around the room, seeing only the remnants of the curse that had consumed everything in its path. He knew what he had to do, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. The price of his freedom was too high. But as the woman's form began to fade, she spoke one final time. Remember, Ryan, she whispered. There's always a price to be paid. With that, the room plunged back into darkness. As Ryan stands there, staring into the abyss of shadows that once claimed the souls of the innocent, you may find yourself asking, what would you have done? Would you have chosen to sacrifice another person to escape the curse, or would you have remained, doomed like the others, forever trapped in that haunted mansion? What would be the price for your freedom, and what would you be willing to give up in exchange? Each twist in the story has led to this ultimate question: could you live with the consequences of your choices? Could you bear the burden of knowing you were the one who condemned someone else to an eternity of torment? So, after hearing 3 stories, which story left the biggest impression on you? Was it the haunted mansion with the whispers in the dark, or the tragic fate of the characters trapped by their own choices? Would you have liked a different ending? Or perhaps, a twist that could change the whole course of events? We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale and want to hear more, make sure to like and follow our channel. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating these thrilling stories for you. Stay tuned for more terrifying tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thanks for listening, and remember, not all stories are meant to end happily.